It's late, I know, but I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're slipping into a world both impossibly old and vividly alive. A civilization of obsidian blades and floating gardens, of sun gods who must be fed, and calendars that never forgot your name. This is the Aztec Empire, beautiful, brutal, and if you showed up tomorrow morning, uninvited, well, you wouldn't last a day. But for now, you're safe. You're only visiting in the quiet of night, from a distance. So lie back, dim the lights. Let yourself wonder, what does it mean to call something a civilization when survival is always a ritual? And if you enjoy this kind of storytelling, subscribe. If you'd like to stay a little longer next time, no pressure. Feel free to comment where you're listening from, or what time it is. Now let's begin. The problem with the universe, at least according to the Mexica priests, was that it was always falling apart. You don't get a benevolent clockmaker god in this story. No celestial comfort blanket. No, everything happens for a reason. You get fire, collapse, and sacrifice. They believed the world had ended 4 times already. Not metaphorically, literally. Gone. One age drowned. One consumed by jaguars. Another swept away by hurricane winds. We're living in the 5th sun, they said. The final age. And it only stays alive if you keep feeding it. So you do, and what does the sun eat? Hearts, blood, human breath turned into steam against temple stone. That's where you come in. Not yet, not physically, but spiritually, certainly. You modern, skeptical, squeamish are part of this ancient rhythm, even now. Because fear of the dark and the desperate need to keep going doesn't belong to one culture. It belongs to all of us. The Mexica didn't kill for pleasure. Not exactly. They killed because it was how you paid your cosmic taxes. The gods made the world, but they made it by dying. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, gave his own blood to create humankind. And now it's your turn to give back. Every drop a thank you. Every ritual a reassurance. We are still here. We remember. And the thing is, it worked. The sun kept rising. That's the trick of it, really. When you offer blood, and the sky turns gold again, who's going to tell you it wasn't because of you? So imagine now you're standing in the great ceremonial precinct of Tenochtitlan. Not as a victim. Not yet. Just a visitor. Watching a drum starts. Not like a song, more like a pulse. A priest raises a knife of volcanic glass, sharper than steel, thin as a whisper. And you try not to flinch, not to look away, because everyone else is watching calmly. This isn't horror, it's holiness. And somewhere, a child throws petals into the air. Somewhere, an old woman murmurs a prayer for her sons. And the sun rises, again. You begin to understand, not agree, but understand why they did it. Because the world was always ending. And this was how they held it together. By now, you might be wondering, what did they eat, these people of obsidian and stars? Surely not just hearts. And you'd be right, mostly, in the cool of dawn. Tenochtitlan's markets bloomed like flowers spilling with maize, amaranth, beans, chilies, squash, tamales steamed in corn husks, chocolate, bitter and sacred, frothed with chili or honey. There were frogs, axolotls, ducks raised on floating gardens, tiny fish dried crisp like leaves, corn cakes for the poor, turkey for the nobles, pulque for the old gods and old men alike. The Mexica diet was mostly plant-based, but meticulously balanced. Not because they were modern health gurus, but because the land taught them discipline. Protein came through insects and algae. Salt was harvested from lakes. Even their teeth held up better than their European counterparts, who were still gnawing half-rotten meat through molars black with rot. But every so often, yes, human flesh, not every day, not casually, but symbolically, ceremonially, sparingly. A warrior captured in battle might be sacrificed to Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, and his body ritually shared among the elite. Not as food, exactly, but as communion, as power redistributed. To eat the enemy was to take on their valor, their spirit, their gift to the sun. And this wasn't unique. Across history, across continents, ritual cannibalism surfaces in moments of cosmic hunger. But it's always easier to judge from afar, isn't it? You, seated in your modern world, half asleep, half scrolling. You who have never had to trade blood for sunrise. You wouldn't last a day, not because you'd be eaten, but because you'd refuse to see the logic of a world that isn't yours. You'd panic at the drums, gag at the smell of blood and roses. You'd speak at the wrong time. You'd stare at the wrong priest. And when they asked you who your gods were, you wouldn't know what to say. Because, even now, most of us don't. So yes, they might feed you tamales and chocolate, or they might feed you to the gods. Depends on how lucky you are, or how hungry the sun feels tomorrow. The mistake we often make, walking into history, is assuming we'd be welcome. You imagine stepping into Tenochtitlan like it's a living museum, taking photos with children, tasting street food, complimenting the artistry. Maybe you'd say something about the architecture, how it reminds you of Venice or Singapore, or maybe just Minecraft. But to the people who built this city, you wouldn't be a guest. You'd be a disruption, a ripple in the order, a question no one asked. The Mexica had a name for foreigners, Quetzalcoatl. It didn't mean traveler. It meant someone from outside, alien, unrooted. And for them, roots were everything. Your lineage, your clan, your role in the cosmos, these weren't accessories. They were obligations, contracts with the gods. Break the chain and the world begins to unspool. So what happens when someone shows up who doesn't belong anywhere? That's you, and it wouldn't take long for them to notice. Maybe it's your clothing. Maybe it's your silence. Maybe it's the way you flinch when the jaguar warriors pass, their painted skins and feathered helmets gleaming like hallucinations. They'd ask, who is your Kalpli or neighborhood clan? You wouldn't know. They'd ask, what offerings have you made to Tlaloc, the rain god? You'd blink. They'd ask, who do you fight for? And you'd have no answer. Not really. Because even now, so many of us live without a cause, without a god. Not because we're faithless, but because faith feels like a language we forgot in childhood. To the Mexica, this isn't just disorienting. It's dangerous. People without gods don't just float, they decay. So maybe they send you to the temple. Maybe they assign you a priest. Maybe they try to save you. But in the end, you're not a traveler. You're a mirror, and they don't like what they see. Because if the fifth sun ends, if the gods abandon the world, it won't be because the warriors failed. It'll be because someone, somewhere, stopped believing. And maybe that someone looks a lot like you. Night comes early in Tenochtitlan. Not because of darkness, no. The stars over Lake Texcoco shine clear and cold. But because night here is a place, a presence, a thing you enter. And tonight, as you lie curled in a borrowed blanket, heart still thudding from the sound of drums, you dream. You dream of Quetzalcoatl, not as a god, exactly, but as a memory, a whisper in your bones. The feathered serpent is different from the others. He does not thirst for blood the way Huitzilopochtli does. He doesn't scream for sacrifice. He teaches, creates, regrets, He is the God who tried to make a world without violence and failed. And when he failed, he walked away, eastward, into the morning, into myth. Some say he'll return, others say he never left. In your dream, he speaks softly, not in words, in feeling, shame, curiosity, a warning. Because you've seen too much, because you don't belong, because time is not a line, it's a circle and somehow, impossibly, your presence here is a crease in that circle. You wake before dawn, the city is quiet, no screams, no bells, just the sound of water lapping gently against the chinampas, and a canoe slipping by like a ghost. And you wonder, what does it mean to dream of a God you never believed in? What does it mean to be remembered by a people you never knew? What if this was never a history lesson? What if it was a test? You're not here to study the Aztecs. You're here to be studied, measured, weighed, and perhaps found wanting. You don't build a God with faith alone. You build a God with stone, with repetition, with the slow piling up of meaning until even a cracked statue can stop your breath. Tenochtitlan wasn't just a city. It was a stage set for ritual, a map of the cosmos rendered in mortar and myth. The Templo Mayor rose like a stepped pyramid in the center, each side devoted to a different god, a different cosmic force. To the east, Tlaloc, the rainbringer, blue and fanged. To the south, Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of war, bright with blood and sunlight. They shared the same foundation. Imagine that. Even the gods had to learn to live together. But not equally. Huitzilopochtli got the lion's share of height, of offerings, of fear. Because war, unlike rain, can be manufactured, and gods, like empires, thrive when they are fed. The Mexica did not simply worship their gods, they engineered them. Temples were built on older temples, paint layered over paint. With every generation, the city grew thicker with memory. It's said that when the Spanish tore down the Templo Mayor, they found at least 7 layers beneath it, 7 worlds, 7 ages, 7 truths, buried under ash and ambition. What kind of people bury their own past in plain sight? Maybe people who believe the present is always a renovation, not a new world, but a new coat of paint on the bones of an older one. And if you listen, the stones still whisper. Archaeologists unearthed a statue of Coyolxauhqui near the base of the Templo Mayor. She's the sister Huitzilopochtli, dismembered in myth, her limbs flung down the mountain. They placed her image at the foot of the steps, so that every sacrifice, every heart offered, every body thrown would land on her. The gods here are not passive. They bleed, they kill. They teach you how to die, but also, maybe, how to endure, how to lay a story over trauma until it becomes architecture, how to make something sacred out of something broken. To you, blood is private. It means injury, embarrassment, maybe a medical emergency. It's something to hide, to stop, to clean. But here, in the heart of the Mexica world, blood is not a problem. It's a solution, a medium, a message. It's how you talk to the gods. Not metaphorically, literally. Cut your ear, spill a few drops, and you've sent a postcard to Tlaloc. Prick your thigh, and Quetzalcoatl knows you're listening. The priests knew this better than anyone. They didn't just wield blades, they wielded vocabulary. They bled from ears, tongues, genitals, not out of masochism, but meaning. Because every ritual act was a sentence, a syllable, a word in the divine grammar of survival. The gods made the world with their blood, so mortals answered with theirs. Think about it. What would you sacrifice to keep the world from ending? Not in theory, not in a poem or a panic room, really. What would you give? A finger, a child, your own breath. The Mexica didn't romanticize pain. They ritualized it. They gave it structure, purpose, geometry. Temples weren't just tall, they were measured exactly to echo the heavens. Chants weren't improvised, they were recited with mathematical cadence. And blood didn't gush randomly. It traced patterns, circles, spirals, stories. To them, blood wasn't chaos, it was choreography. And you still think the body is yours. That your skin is a boundary, not a bridge. That the soul lives inside and not all around you. So no, you wouldn't last a day, not because of the violence, but because you wouldn't know what to say when the gods leaned close and asked you to speak. If the Mexica world had a patron of tenderness, it was Tlaloc, he of the rains, the maize, the mountain springs, he who gave life and took it, especially from children. No one likes to talk about this part. Even modern scholars shift uncomfortably. Even the most vivid murals seem to soften here. But truth is not gentle. Every year, before the rainy season, offerings had to be made to ensure the clouds would come and the corn would grow and the lakes would not vanish into thirst. And so the priests chose the most precious gift they could imagine, children, not many, not often, but often enough that the records survive. They were dressed in flowers. Their tears were considered sacred necessary. If they didn't cry, it meant the gods were not listening. So the priests made sure they cried. You can stop here if you need to. You're allowed to look away. But the Mexica didn't. Because to them, this wasn't cruelty. It was symmetry. Tlaloc ruled over paradise and storms. His realm was both heaven and flood. His blessings were double-edged, like every gift from the gods. And the children, they weren't victims, they were messengers. That's what they believed. And belief has teeth. Ask yourself, what would you do if the rain stopped? If your people were starving and your gods silent? Would you pray? Would you protest? Would you bargain? Would you take a child by the hand and lead them up the steps of the Templo Mayor, whispering that they were chosen? Would you believe it? Or would you stand at the base of the pyramid, fists clenched, furious at the sky? And would the sky listen? Maybe not. Maybe that's why the Mexica made sure it had no choice. By now, you might be thinking, this is a world obsessed with violence. But that's not quite true. It's a world obsessed with order and war. War was just another way to maintain it. The Mexica didn't fight like Europeans. Not for land, not for gold, not for glory. They fought for balance, for tribute, for bodies. Theirs was a war of choreography planned, precise, almost theatrical. Before a battle, dates were agreed upon. Rules established. This wasn't chaos. It was calendar work. They called them Exioyatl, flower wars. Beautiful name, terrible business. Warriors adorned themselves with paint and feathers. They didn't aim to kill quickly. They aimed to capture, to bring home living prisoners who could then be offered to the gods, not out of sadism, but because a death on the battlefield didn't count. It had to be seen, celebrated, sacrificed. Only then did it mean something. Only then did it feed the sun. Imagine your life depending on your ability to survive a battle you were never meant to win. That's how many neighboring peoples lived under Mexica dominance. City-states like Tlaxcala or Huexotzinco didn't just fear the empire, they participated in its rituals, however unwillingly. They knew they were the fields from which the gods' harvest would be drawn, and for the Mexica, every warrior was a priest, every battle a sermon, and every prisoner a prayer. Think of it this way. When you walk into a church and see the stations of the cross, what do you see? Pain or purpose? to the Mexica War was no less sacred. The blood shed in combat wasn't a waste. It was a page in the divine book of balance. And those who fought, who bled, who offered themselves, were writing history with their bodies. You wouldn't last a day, because you'd see war as failure, and they saw it as structure. You've walked through museums. You've seen the stone discs, the feathered shields, the carvings of serpents and skulls. You've read the plaques, admired the craftsmanship, then you probably moved on. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We move on. But the Mexica world didn't end when the Spanish arrived. Not really, yes, Tenochtitlan burned. Its temples collapsed under siege and smallpox. Its gods were buried, some in rubble, some in silence. And yes, a new city rose over the ruins. A Catholic one, a colonial one. Mexico City. But if you walk carefully, the past still breathes beneath the asphalt, literally. In 1978, workers laying underground cables stumbled upon a stone, a circular relief, 12 feet wide, Coyolxauhqui, her broken body still staring up at the sky. For centuries after the world she belonged to was torn apart. And around her, they found more. Altars, offerings, human remains, not artifacts, testimonies, proof that the gods were not forgotten, just hidden. Imagine that. An entire sacred precinct, buried for 500 years, and people living on top of it the whole time, unknowing, or maybe just unwilling to remember. What does it say about us that we can live above the bones of a civilization and not feel the heartbeat? What does it mean that we paved over temples to build parking lots? Maybe the gods never left. Maybe they're just sleeping under layers of concrete and forgetfulness. Maybe they dream in Nahuatl, waiting for someone to speak their names again. And maybe, as you walk the streets of Mexico City, you feel a tremor. Not an earthquake. Not quite. Just the slow exhale of a history that is not done with you. Not yet. When you died in the Mexica world, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Something longer. Something harder. And where you went, what afterlife received you didn't depend on your virtue. It depended on your death. There were many destinations. Fall in battle or die in childbirth, and you followed the sun. Rise each day with him in the sky, your breath becoming golden wind. Drown or die from lightning. You went to Tlalolocana, paradise of endless rain and blooming maize. Soft deaths, quiet ones, led you elsewhere to Mictlan, the land of shadows. A long, hard journey beneath the earth. But you didn't go empty-handed. No one did. Your family buried you with offerings, paper flags, beads, food for the road. They called your name again and again so it wouldn't be forgotten, because forgetting is a second death. They lit copal, that sweet white smoke that smells like memory, a signal fire to the underworld, a path carved in scent, and they wept. Not because they doubted, but because even a good death is still a leaving. We imagine ancient peoples as stoic, unfeeling, but the Mexica grieved. They sang dirges, painted tombs, pressed tiny treasures into the cold hands of the dead. Love doesn't vanish just because your gods wear jaguar skins. It lingers, and you, if you died here, they wouldn't know what to do with you. No Tenali, no soul map, no kin to call your name, just an outsider's corpse. Silent, directionless, you might wander the levels of Mictlan for eternity, barefoot and lost. Or worse, you might be remembered by no one. And in this world, that's the cruelest fate of all. Not pain, not hell, but to be unnamed. You wouldn't see it at first. There are no signs to Mictlan, no gates, no river to cross with coins on your eyes. only a horizon, and the sound of wind that isn't quite wind. 9 levels, that's what the priests said. 9 trials, one for each piece of yourself you must let go of. It wasn't punishment, it was process, because the soul, in the Mexica world, wasn't a single thing. It was a collection, a chorus, different kinds of breath, spirit, shadow, heat, and death didn't take it all at once. It peeled you apart, piece by piece, as you journeyed. First you crossed a mountain range, jagged and cold, then a place where your heart was pierced by arrows of obsidian, then a desert of howling beasts, a path of knives, a wind that stripped flesh from bone. It wasn't meant to be survived. It was meant to be surrendered to. Only when all that was you, your ego, your story, your memory was gone, only then did you reach the base, Mictlan proper, the quiet, ruled by Mictlantecuhtli, the skeletal god of death, and his wife Mictlantecuhtli, lady of the dead. But don't picture them as evil. They weren't devils, they were keepers, caretakers of what we all become, and they didn't want your soul, they wanted your truth. And truth only emerges when everything else is stripped away. You might ask, what's the point? Why suffer through 9 levels of forgetting? Why not simply fade? Because the Mexica believed the soul had to be cleansed of life before it could be absorbed into the next pattern, like dye washed from a cloth before new color is applied. And so you walked, you bled, you knelt, you forgot, and only then did you rest. But only if you were lucky, only if your people remembered your name, only if you had a place in the song. In the modern world, death is often lonely. A white room, a machine that beeps, paperwork, polite condolences. But here, death was a choreography, not just for the soul, for the living. The moment someone died, the household became a sacred site. Clothes were changed, mirrors covered, fire extinguished, because death had entered the space, and you didn't want it to stay. The family would prepare the body with salt and seeds. They'd tie the feet together, wrap the hands, not to restrain the dead, but to remind them not to linger. And then they'd call the soul by name, over and over again. A farewell, yes, but also a kind of guide. Words become bridges in the Mexica world, even when spoken through tears. Neighbors came with food, priests with smoke. The community took part not in mourning, but in maintenance, keeping the world stitched together, one ritual at a time. For children, the grieving was different. They were believed to go not to Mictlan, but to Chichiholcuco, a paradise beneath a giant tree. Its branches dripped with milk. There they would grow again, not in flesh, but in spirit, awaiting rebirth, or perhaps just rest. Because not every soul needed lessons, some simply needed peace. We often imagine ancient rituals as strange, foreign, but how strange is it, really, to light a candle and whisper a name? How foreign is it to hope the dead are not gone, just changed? They carried their dead with them, not in urns, but in memory, in offerings, in names carved into stone and breath. And the living, they didn't move on, they moved with. History in the Mexica world wasn't written in lines. It was painted, on deer hide, on bark, on agave paper stretched like skin across time. These were the codicized books, but not as you know them. They unfold like accordions, they breathe, filled with pictographs and symbols, not sentences. Because writing here wasn't about sounds, it was about meaning. Each glyph, a whole story. A footprint meant travel. A burning temple meant conquest. A face with speech scrolls meant a speech that changed the world. But to read one, really read it, you had to know the rhythm. Not just what the pictures meant, but how they flowed. Left to right, top to bottom, spiral to center. Each image linking to the next like a thought half whispered in sleep. And you couldn't read them. Not because you're unintelligent, but because you've forgotten how to see symbolically. You've been taught that stories live in letters, that knowledge is linear. But in the Mexica world, time folds in on itself. Myth and memory are the same. You read with your eyes and your heart. And the codices didn't just preserve events. They warned, they mourned, they hoped. So many were burned by the Spanish. 1,000 years of memory gone in a single funeral pyre. They said it was to save souls, but maybe it was to silence them. Yet a few survive. Fragments, echoes, and in them the gods still walk. The sun still bleeds. The old world still spins, waiting for someone not just to read it, but to remember. The Mexica believed that poetry was the highest form of truth, not because it was beautiful, but because it was the only way to speak about death without lying. They called it in Xochitl, in Cuicatl, the flower, the song, and that's how they saw language, as something alive, fragrant, fleeting. They didn't write poetry to impress. They wrote it to endure. Some of it still survives. Barely. Scattered verses, saved by monks who didn't quite understand them, and scholars who tried to pin petals to a page. But if you listen, if you really listen, you can still hear the questions they asked in the dark. Is it true that we live on Earth? Not forever on Earth, only a little while here. Let us go, let us enjoy ourselves. I will leave songs, I will leave flowers. Imagine saying goodbye with flowers instead of explanations. Imagine preparing for death not with fear, but with verse. Imagine the last thing you ever gave someone was a poem whispered between sobs. They didn't believe in permanence. They believed in beauty. In the brief bloom, in the echo of a voice carried on the wind. You might scoff. You might call it naive. But in a world where gods demanded blood, and every sunrise was a negotiation, poetry was rebellion. To sing, to paint, to plant a flower in the soil of impermanence, that was the most sacred act of all, and maybe the most human. Because in the end, we all carry something into the afterlife, a name, a verse, a memory whispered in the hush before sleep, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's always been enough. They say that empires die slowly, and then all at once. But for the Mexica, the warnings came early and often. In the decade before the Spanish arrived, the sky changed. A comet blazed across the heavens. Fire danced on the lake. The temples trembled, though no one touched them. A woman was heard weeping in the night, wailing for her lost children. They called her Cihuacotl, the snake woman, a spirit of grief, half-forgotten goddess, half-mother of a nation already bleeding at the edges. She walked the roads, they said, crying, "My children, where shall I take you?" Even the emperor Moctezuma listened. He sent priests to interpret the signs, sorcerers to cast lots. He offered more blood, more hearts, more hope. But the gods were silent, and silence was never a good omen. Then came the stories of strangers landing on the eastern coast. Pale men with metal skin, creatures that walked on 4 legs, ships like floating mountains. Moctezuma didn't celebrate. He hesitated. He asked, could it be Quetzalcoatl returned, as foretold, or was it something worse? Some say he froze. Others say he saw too clearly. He sent gifts, not soldiers, gold, not warnings. Because what do you do when the world ends? Do you fight it, or do you bow and hope to be spared? We like to imagine ourselves brave, noble, defiant, but sometimes history is just a man on a throne, holding omens in both hands and choosing silence, because he knows you can't stop a story once it's begun. You can only decide how you'll be remembered when it ends. It's comforting to blame Hernan Cortes. One villain, one narrative. He came, he saw, he betrayed, and yes, he did all those things. But the fall of the Mexica wasn't just a Spanish conquest. It was a collapse engineered by old wounds, quiet enemies, and gods that had stopped answering their mail. When Cortes landed in 1519 of the Common Era, he didn't arrive with an army. He arrived with a story that said he might be a god. A story that said maybe the end had come, and maybe it was time. But even that wouldn't have mattered, if not for the allies. Tlaxcala Texcoco, dozens of city-states who had lived under Mexica tribute, Mexica rule, Mexica threat, and wanted out. They didn't see Cortes as a savior. They saw him as a tool, someone who could help tip the scales. So they gave him what Spain could not. Thousands of native soldiers, scouts, interpreters, and most importantly, known to history as La Malinche, a noblewoman, a linguist, a survivor, given some say taken as a gift to Cortes. She spoke Nahuatl, Maya, and later Spanish, and through her voice, worlds collided. She translated the lies, the promises, the warnings. Without her, the conquest would have been impossible, and for centuries, she has borne the weight of that betrayal. Traitor, temptress, mother of a broken land. But the truth is more brittle. She was a woman navigating annihilation, and she chose survival. Can you blame her? We do, we always do. But the Mexica didn't fall because of one woman or one man. They fell because empires rot from within, because no god, no city, no sun lasts forever, and because even the strongest walls can't keep out a story whose time has come. When Cortes and his allies reached Tenochtitlan, they didn't burn it, not right away. They entered like guests, in awe, in silence. Imagine it, foreigners stepping off their canoes onto flower-strewn causeways, looking up at temples taller than anything they'd seen, hearing the drums, smelling the incense, feeling history press in from all sides. Some wept, not out of grief, out of disbelief. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, one of Cortes' chroniclers, wrote that it seemed like a dream, that no one in Spain could believe a place so grand existed outside of legend. And Moctezuma, he welcomed them, not warmly, not foolishly, but with the weary grace of someone who sees the storm coming and chooses to walk into it. He offered them gold, lodgings, even a palace, and slowly the Spanish made themselves at home. Tensions rose, fights broke out, a temple was desecrated, an ambassador killed, and then violence. It spiraled fast. Cortes fled the city in what came to be called La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. He returned with more troops, more allies, and this time he did not leave. The siege lasted 80 days. Tenochtitlan was starved, flooded, bombarded, its causeways choked with corpses, its markets turned to mud. And in the end, the city didn't burn like Rome. It sank into the lake, into memory, into metaphor. And you, if you were there, if by some cruel magic you stood watching from a rooftop as the sun set over the water, you might have whispered, "This wasn't supposed to end like this," but it did. Because every empire tells itself it is eternal, until the mirror cracks, and what it sees staring back is not divinity, but dust. After the fall, the smoke didn't clear, it thickened. Temples collapsed, statues smashed, priests dragged from altars and forced to kneel before crosses. But the gods, they didn't scream, they didn't fight. They waited, because gods, unlike cities, are patient. And what happened next wasn't simple. The Spanish didn't erase the old religion, not completely. They absorbed it. Feathered serpents became angels. Corn mothers became saints. Obsidian knives were hidden in the folds of rosaries, and the people, they nodded, they crossed themselves, and they kept planting flowers for Tlaloc when the rains came late. They told stories beneath their breath. They whispered the old names in dreams. The conquerors believed they had triumphed. But faith is not a fortress, it's a fungus. It grows in cracks. And over time, the gods returned, not as they were, but changed, masked, smuggled into mass, in baskets of maize and strings of beads. Even now, you'll find them, in the colors of the Dia de los Muertos altars, in the scent of marigolds and copel, in the soft weeping of La Llorona on a bridge at midnight. They are not gone, they are sleeping. And sometimes, when the candle flickers just so, and the wind smells of wet stone and earth, you remember, not with your mind, with your blood, because the gods did not die. They simply waited for you to say their names again. The conquerors wrote their victory in ink, in journals, in reports, in letters sent back to monarchs with wide eyes and greedy hands, and for centuries, those were the voices we heard. They told us the Mexica were savages, that their empire was a tyranny, that their gods were demons, that their fall was inevitable. But history is not what is written, it's what is remembered, and memory doesn't always use words. Sometimes it grows in gardens built the old way, on beds of soil and water. Sometimes it hides in lullabies sung to children under a blanket of stars. Sometimes it dances at night in the sway of skirts embroidered with flowers, on a floor slick with candle wax and sweat. And sometimes it cries out in the hearts of those who feel displaced, disconnected, disinherited, because the past is not behind us. It is underneath, waiting. Tenochtitlan is not gone. It breathes beneath Mexico City, beneath the traffic, the concrete, the wires. If you stand in the Zocalo and close your eyes, you might feel it, a rhythm, a heartbeat, the ghost of a drum. And in that moment, you'll understand the Mexico world never truly ended. It was buried, and like all things buried, it dreams. Let's play a game. Let's say you wake up tomorrow not in your bed, not in your century, but in the heart of Tenochtitlan. No warning, no instruction manual, just there. A stranger in your own skin. What happens next? Are you a merchant, counting cacao beans like coins? A priest, your hands inked with ash and blood? A child, chasing dragonflies down a canal, unaware that your life will never be written down? Or maybe you're no one, a nameless captive, an anomaly, a body that doesn't fit the story. What happens to you depends on everything: where you arrive, what you look like, whether you flinch when someone offers you pulque, whether you know how to kneel. Because this world doesn't wait for you to adjust. It moves with the rhythm of the calendar, the pulse of the market, the heat of ritual. There's no time to be confused. You either belong or you don't. And you don't. Not yet. You speak the wrong language. You carry the wrong gods. You look people in the eye when you shouldn't. You ask questions no one is ready to answer. So they watch you, not with cruelty, with curiosity. Because if you don't know the rules, are you even real? What are you doing here? Where is your Calpoli? Where are your people? Where is your name? And you feel it, the ache of unbelonging, like landing in a dream that keeps shifting, just out of reach. You were never meant to be here, but here you are, on the wrong side of time, wearing your skin like a question. Let's say you were born here, not dropped in suddenly like a ghost from the future, but really, truly born here, in a reed mat house, to a mother with worn hands and a father who smells of maize and sweat. Your name would be chosen with care. Names weren't decorative in the Mexica world, they were directional. They told the story of your birth, your season, sometimes your omen. They were gifts and burdens. A newborn girl might be called Xochitl flower if born on a clear day. A boy born in battle season might be Cuauhtémoc, descending eagle. But no matter the name, your path was already being drawn. Because here, childhood wasn't freedom, it was formation. At age 3, you'd begin learning your place. If you were noble, you'd attend a Comacacware. You'd memorize rituals, study astronomy, prepare to lead. If you were common, you'd enter the Telpochacali, the house of youthware. You'd be hardened for labor, for war. You'd wake before dawn. You'd carry firewood, clean temples, practice silence, not as punishment, as preparation. Because life here was not about personal fulfillment. It was about fit, to be part of the pattern, the story, the offering. You'd learn to speak Nahuatl with poetry. You'd learn to dance with reverence. You'd learn that your body was not your own, it belonged to your family, your gods, your people, and love. Love was real, but it came second. First came duty. First came the gods. And maybe, if you were lucky, those two things could touch. And in the spaces between grinding maize and singing songs, you'd glimpse something eternal. The sense that your life mattered, not because it was big, but because it fit, like a single stone in a temple, small but essential. The Mexica world didn't fear death, not like we do. Here, you were taught to face it early, not as punishment, but as promise. Death was everywhere, not hidden, not sanitized. It danced on murals, laughed in masks, loomed over every festival, not in menace, but in memory. From childhood, you knew. Your body was on loan. Someday, you would give it back. If you were a boy, you trained for war, whether you were a noble or not. Not because war was glamorous, but because it was useful. A captured enemy became an offering. A dead warrior became part of the sun's journey. Even your own death could be a gift if it served the cycle. If you were a girl, you learned how to weave, how to grind maize, how to bear children and childbirth. It was battle, too. A woman who died in labor was honored like a fallen soldier, feared even. Her spirit became fiercer warrior ghost who roamed crossroads, a reminder that not all power came with a blade. You might think that sounds harsh, but to the Mexica, it was balance. Every life was a thread in the tapestry, and every thread had a knot where it would be cut. So yes, you'd learn to dance, you'd fall in love under firelit skies, maybe even sneak a kiss behind a chinampa after dark. But you'd also learn how to fall, how to kneel, how to leave the world with purpose. Because life wasn't about lasting forever. It was about finishing well. And if the gods called you early, you'd know how to bow and mean it. In the Mexica world, death came in many shapes, but none as terrifying as silence in the sky. Eclipses weren't curiosities here. They were omens. Not moments to marvel, moments to fear. Because when the moon covered the sun, it wasn't astronomy, it was apocalypse. The sun was being eaten. By what? By Tzitzimime-star demons with skeletal faces and clawed hands, who descended during eclipses to devour the world, and the only thing that kept them at bay: ritual, noise, sacrifice. So when the light dimmed, people screamed, not in panic, in protection. They banged drums, clashed obsidian, tore paper into strips, and burned it as offerings. Pregnant women were hidden away too vulnerable, too close to the edge. Children were told to lie still, whisper prayers, hold tight to amulets. Even the priests trembled, because in that moment, nothing was guaranteed. The world might end, time might unravel, the gods might not return. And what would happen to you then? What happens to a people whose entire cosmology is built on movement when the sky stops? It's easy now to roll your eyes, to think they didn't understand science. But maybe they understood something else. Maybe they understood how thin the veil is, between order and chaos, between belief and despair, between light and whatever waits behind it. And maybe, just maybe, they screamed not because they were afraid of dying, but because they knew how hard it was to make the sun come back. Let's say you make it, you adapt, you learn the language, not just Nahuatl, but the language of gesture, silence, ritual. You stop looking people in the eye. You stop asking questions that don't have offerings behind them. You learn the names of the gods. You learn how to kneel. And slowly, they stop staring at you like a mistake. You're given a task, a place. Maybe you carry water, sweep temple floors, carve stone. Maybe you chant, maybe you bleed. You wake up before dawn and sleep without dreaming. And one day, you feel it. That shift. You don't flinch when the drums begin. You don't look away when the knife comes down. You stop remembering the year you came from. You stop thinking of home. And that's when you realize you're not you anymore. Not the you who walked into this world like it was a museum. You've been rewritten, recarved. You've become someone who belongs. Someone who knows when to fear the sky. Someone who gives thanks with blood and breath and corn. And maybe, late at night, lying under stars you no longer try to name, you wonder, was this always inside me? Did I change? Or did I just remember? Because that's the final secret. You wouldn't last a day in the Aztec Empire, unless you were already meant to. Unless a part of you had been waiting to come back. It's a Tuesday in Mexico City. You're standing near the Zocalo umbrella in hand. Traffic's snarling somewhere behind you. Rain has started to fall. Not hard, just enough to fill the cracks between cobblestones, to darken the stucco, to carry the scent of wet stone up through your shoes. You weren't planning to stop here, but the sound of water makes you pause. Somewhere beneath you, meters down, the stones of Tenochtitlan still hold the rain. Still breathe it in. This used to be lake. This used to be empire. You can't see it, not directly, but you feel it. In the low hum underfoot. In the way the puddles form like old canals trying to remember themselves. In the way people move around this square without noticing the ghosts. Maybe they do notice. Maybe they just don't say. Maybe they've learned to walk with the memory. And you remember enough now to know that history isn't gone. It's buried. That's why the city floods so easily, because it was never meant to be dry. Tenochtitlan wasn't raised, it was drowned. And in the rain, it rises, quietly, patiently, stone by stone. Not with anger, with gravity, with the memory of a city that once grew from water, fed by gods, tethered to the stars, and refuses even now to disappear. You watch the drops gather. You think of chinampas, of temples, of blood in the dust, and you feel, for the briefest moment, like you are being watched. Not with malice, with memory, the kind that waits, the kind that listens, the kind that still knows your name. It's easy to think of calendars as rectangles, boxes to tick, days to lose, but the Mexica didn't measure time in lines. They measured it in cycles. 2 interlocking gears, the tonal pauli, a sacred 260-day calendar of days and gods, and the Shupawali, a solar 365-day calendar of seasons and ceremonies. They spun together like breath and heartbeat, like fate and choice, and every person was born under a specific designer combination of number and symbol that shaped your path. 1 rabbit, 13 flint, 7 monkey, not just names, maps, predictions, portents. A child born under 1 deer might become a wanderer. A 10 reed might be marked for speech or death. This wasn't superstition. It was structure, an agreement between earth and sky. Priests kept these calendars with obsessive precision. They tracked eclipses, the moments when the world turned a corner and the veil grew thin, and when the gears aligned when both calendars met every 52 years. They performed the new fire ceremony. They let the fires burn out. Darkness blanketed the city, and if the stars held, if the gods were pleased, they lit a new fire in the chest of a man, carved it out with obsidian, and passed the flame through the city like breath restored. The world would continue, for another cycle, and you were born in another century, another continent. But what if your day sign still echoes? What if your body remembers a fire you never lit? What if the gears still turn for you? Silently, faithfully, beneath your modern bones? And what if all of this, your listening, your wondering, was foretold, written not in pixels, but in jade? You walk through the gallery, air-conditioned, quiet, clean. The label says Aztec ritual knife, glass case, numbered plaque, neutral font, but it's more than a knife. It's a message. An obsidian whisper, flaked and fitted to cut through flesh and time. Once it touched hearts. Once it called the sun. Now it sits still, still sharp, still waiting. You move on next. Case, turquoise, mosaic mask, shell inlays, gold earrings. A plaque explains the iconography, but the explanation is not the mask. The explanation doesn't breathe, doesn't remember the face it once covered, the prayers it once heard, and around you people murmur, children run, a couple takes selfies. Somewhere near the gift shop, someone complains about the lighting, and the mask just watches, not angry, just forgotten. Museums are full of stories that don't get told, because they're too inconvenient, too bloody, too loud, or too quiet. You can't fit Tenochtitlan on a pedestal. You can't summarize an empire with a plaque. But we try, we catalogue, we curate, we translate until meaning fades like pigment on old stone. And sometimes, late at night, the guards say the exhibits shift, that the codices curl at the edges, that the floor grows warm near the altar stones. No one admits it, but they all feel it, because you can bury a city, you can lock up its gods, but you cannot make them stop watching. And you're not just a visitor, you're a mourner, a witness, someone who knows, now, that museums are not about answers, they're about echoes. And tonight, you've heard one. Nahuatl is still spoken. Not in every corner, not by every child, but in valleys, in kitchens, in dreams. It's the sound of corn grinding, of rivers naming themselves, of elders telling stories no one wrote down. It survives, not as a monument, as a murmur. Over 1 million people still speak it, in variations shaped by mountains and time. Farmers, teachers, grandmothers who stir pozole with hands that remember the old rhythms. It carries the scent of wet earth and smoke. It carries meanings that can't be translated. Take the word tlotsokomati. It means thank you, but not the transactional thank you of a receipt or a favor returned. It means, I hold you in my heart. It means, your gift is sacred. Or Chekiotic red, but not just red. The red of blood, of fire, of sacred pigments. Or Tietla word for God, but also for energy, for mystery, for divinity woven into stone and rain. Nahuatl doesn't draw lines. It sings circles. And if you've never heard it, truly heard it sure, missing a rhythm your blood might still know, it's not a lost language, it's a resistant one, because it was never meant to be caged in grammar books. It lives in ceremony, in lullabies, in the spaces between words and you. Even if you can't speak it, you're speaking with it now. By listening, by wondering, by remembering the syllables of a world they told you was gone, but is still, softly, still. Here, you light a candle, not for a ritual, not consciously. Maybe it's for a bath, a moment of peace, a mood. But the flame flickers, and you pause. You remember something, you don't know what. Only that the warmth feels older than it should. That somewhere in the heat, there's a presence you haven't named in years, maybe ever. You pour water for your plants. You line your windowsill with marigolds in October. You burn incense, not because you were told to, but because it feels right. You offer things without calling them offerings. And somewhere, something notices. Not a deity, maybe. Not a feathered serpent or a rain god with jaguar eyes. But presence, recognition, a feeling that the veil is thinner than we pretend. That memory has a mouth, and sometimes it asks to be fed. The Mexican knew this. They knew that the gods are not up there, aloof and celestial. They are here, in fire, in maize, in sweat and song and breath. They knew that to live is to feed the sacred, and they knew that even forgetting takes energy. Even silence costs something. So yes, the gods still get hungry, and no, they don't demand blood. Not anymore. Sometimes a whisper is enough. Sometimes a song. Sometimes just the act of noticing, of setting down your coffee, looking out the window and saying, I remember, even if you don't know what, even if you're not sure why, even if all you can offer is the flame of your attention trembling in the dark. You've heard it your whole life. The Aztecs were brutal, bloodthirsty, savages. It's in the textbooks, the travel guides, the casual remarks passed down like heirlooms. Civilized people don't sacrifice hearts. Civilized people don't eat their enemies. Civilized people don't worship the sun with knives. But what does civilized mean? Concrete, coffee shops, libraries. What about prisons? What about loneliness? What about bombs dropped with surgical precision and polite press releases? The Mexico world had violence, yes, but it also had structure, beauty, law. Gardens that fed thousands, medicine made from earth, architecture aligned with stars. It had community, language, poetry. It had memory. It had meaning. Can we say the same? We build empires, too. Only we call them industries. We sacrifice, too. Only we do it quietly, on the altar of efficiency, of convenience, of profit. And when we look back at the Mexica and flinch, is it really the blood that disturbs us, or the mirror? Because they believed the gods must be fed, and we believe in progress. But neither comes free. So maybe the question isn't whether they were civilized. Maybe the question is whether we are. And maybe if we're honest, we're still trying to answer that. The Mexica Empire was built on more than obsidian and blood. It was also built on plants, on patience, on water, and nowhere is that clearer than in the Chinampas. Floating gardens, they're sometimes called, but they didn't float. Not really. They were crafted, woven from mud, roots, will, and memory. Rectangular plots anchored in the lake bed, fringed with willow trees to keep the soil from drifting. Lattice of maize and beans and squash growing in cycles more ancient than empire. The Spanish couldn't believe it when they saw them. A city that fed itself. No slaves dragging stones through deserts. No grain taxed into famine. Just canals and corn and coordination. This was civilization, too. Not loud, not blood-soaked, not gold-plated, but green, alive, deliberate. A single chinampa could yield 7 harvests a year, more than modern farmland in some places. Engineered ecosystems, labor made sacred through repetition, and when a plot grew tired, they let it rest. They knew how not to take too much. When the empire collapsed, the gardens didn't. They kept growing. Even now, outside Mexico City, you can find them. In Xochimilco, still feeding, still flowering, still reminding anyone who cares to notice that civilization isn't just war and walls. It's what you grow when no one's watching, and what you choose to keep alive when everything else is falling apart. History keeps a ledger. Wars, dates, dynasties, winners, losers, dead. We learn to count the bodies, to measure power in blood spilled and territory claimed. But what about the silences, the songs unsung, the names unspoken, the knowledge burned? The Spanish conquest of the Mexica world killed thousands, but it also silenced millions. Languages lost, codices turned to ash, lineages broken like clay. We don't count those in history books because we don't know how. We don't have metrics for memory, no charts for spiritual erosion. But ask any culture what it feels like to forget. Ask them what it costs to lose the stories that made their grandmothers sing. It's a grief that doesn't end. It just burrows deeper. And so we admire the pyramids, but not the prayers. We analyze the battles, but not the lullabies. We memorize the fall of Tenochtitlan, but not the way children once whispered their day signs into the lake and waited for the echo. We study what can be quantified and leave the rest behind. But what if civilization isn't about what we build? What if it's about what we remember? Not in books, in breath, in rhythm, in ritual. What if the most civilized thing a person can do is keep a silence sacred and listen? Graves tell stories that monuments never will. The Mexica buried their dead with offerings. Not just the wealthy, everyone. Clay whistles, bits of obsidian, maize dough shaped like skulls, tokens for the journey, tools for the soul. They believed the dead had work to do, not in some paradise of ease, but in a world that mirrored this one darker, deeper, harder, and the living. They carried the dead with them, in festivals, in flower petals, in names. Every year the veil thinned, and instead of fearing ghosts, they fed them. Bread shaped like bones, altars of sugar and salt and smoke. They remembered, not as nostalgia, as duty, because to forget the dead was to end them a second time. We bury our dead, too, but often quickly, quietly, disinfected and deferred. We fear the dead. We cover mirrors. We whisper condolences and change the subject. But the Mexica didn't look away. They painted death, danced with it, wrote poetry in its name, not to celebrate suffering, but to recognize the cycle. Because what you bury tells you what you believe about the world. And here, they believed nothing ended, only transformed. They believed death had a face, and it deserved to be named. Maybe we could learn from that. Maybe civilization isn't about how we live. Maybe it's about how we say goodbye. So we return to the beginning. To the question, would you last a day in the Aztec Empire? No. But not because they were monsters. Not because you were soft, but because the world was different. And you would be different too. You wouldn't just struggle to survive. You'd struggle to understand, to move in rhythm with a calendar that never repeats, to give meaning to pain, to hunger, to ritual, to believe the sun needs you. And maybe, in that struggle, you'd discover something, not just about them, about you. Because the real question isn't survival, it's transformation. What would you become if placed in a world that demanded everything from you? Would you kneel? Would you sing? Would you take someone's hand and lead them to the temple steps? Would you believe the gods are watching? Or would you run? Would you flinch? Would you build a garden and pretend that's enough? There's no right answer, only echoes, only choices. Civilization isn't a destination, it's a question we ask over and over again. And each time we answer, we leave something behind. A word, a child, a flower, a flame. We think of time as something we move through, hours ticking by, days filed in folders. But in the Mexica world, time isn't something you walk across. It's something that stares back at you, a presence, a judge, a pattern you're part of, whether you like it or not. This is the time of the fifth sun, not the fifth hour, not the 5th century, the 5th world. The other 4 have already died. Not in myth, in memory. One drowned, one was torn apart by jaguars. One burned, one was lost to winds so strong they scraped the names off your bones. And now, this sun hour sun shines. But not forever, it must be fed. Every day, it rises because someone bled. Not figuratively, really. Hearts lifted to the sky, smoke rising like promises. The sun doesn't take for granted what it receives, neither should you. You walk under a sky paid for with teeth. You breathe air once filled with chance. You inherit a world kept whole by people who believed every action mattered, not because they were perfect, but because they were afraid. And what better reason is there to create beauty, to buy another day, to push back the dark? They didn't ask if they deserved the sun, they asked what it needed, and they answered in kind. There is something terrifying about being needed, not for your skills, not for your charm, but for your body, for your breath, for your warmth in the cold shadow of dawn. The Mexica didn't see themselves as rulers of nature. They saw themselves as part of it, bound by blood, not above it. The maize god died every year. So did the rain. So did the stars, if left alone too long. And so did you, unless you gave back. Not because you were guilty, because you were grateful. Imagine it, living every day knowing the world could end, not because of evil, but because of neglect, because someone forgot the chant, forgot the flower, forgot to light the fire. So you offer yourself, not in some melodramatic blaze, but in small ways. You dance, you bleed, you whisper, you remember. You take your place in the chain, not at the top, but in the middle. Not special, necessary, not above, within. To the modern mind, this is unsettling. We've been taught to stand apart, to conquer, to consume. But they were taught to continue, to sustain, to submit in service, not shame, to be the offering and the prayer. We talk about the fall of civilizations like it's a spectacle. Flames, crumbling towers, screams. But collapse doesn't always sound like that. Sometimes it's quieter. A child born who doesn't learn the old words. A ritual skipped just once. A garden left untended because there wasn't time. A priest who forgets the last line of a chant, and no one corrects him, because no one remembers either. That's how the fifth sun will end, not with war, with forgetting. The Mexica knew this. They knew that memory was more fragile than stone, that gods die not when their temples fall, but when no one speaks their names, and so they kept speaking, even when it hurt, even when it meant cutting open the body of a stranger and lifting his heart to the sky, not for cruelty, for continuity, because they were afraid of silence, and maybe they were right to be, because look around, not just at the ruins, at the fading languages, at the rituals turned into hashtags, at the way we scroll instead of sing, at the way we forget what season it is unless our phones tell us. Maybe the sun doesn't need blood anymore. Maybe now it needs attention. Maybe remembering is the sacrifice. Maybe that's all the gods ever asked. The Mexica didn't believe in endings, not the way we do. No curtains falling, no final chapters, no exits pursued by jaguar. Their world moved in circles, day into night, seed into stalk, breath into silence, into breath again. You lived, you died, you changed form, you returned. The sun didn't rise, it was reborn. So was the moon, so were you. And this changes things, because if time is a circle, then nothing is ever truly lost. Only waiting, only hidden, only spinning into another shape. Your grief, it returns as song. Your fear as flower. Your loneliness as flame passed hand to hand across centuries, even empires, even you. This isn't a metaphor, it's physics with poetry. It's what happens when a people refuses to see the past as behind them, when they carry it like fire in a clay bowl, careful not to spill, and when they pass that bowl to you, not because you asked, because you're here, you're not supposed to drop it. You're supposed to add your breath, your story, your silence, because even silence has weight. Even silence turns the wheel. And if the world is a circle, then maybe you're exactly where you need to be, even if you've been here before. Especially if you don't remember. You woke up today, you stretched, checked your phone, poured coffee. Maybe you remembered to breathe. But did you think about the sun? Not the science of it, the gift of it. The Mexica did. Every morning was a resurrection, but not automatic, not guaranteed. It had to be earned, fought for, fed, not with gold, with sacrifice, with rhythm, with responsibility. So when the light spilled across the temple stones, it wasn't just physics. It was proof that someone, somewhere, had remembered what to do, that the chant had been said, that the knife had found its mark, that the heart had beat one last time for the benefit of all. You don't need to mimic that. No one is asking for blood. But what are you giving? What are you feeding? What are you carrying into the light? Because your life, your warm shower, your favorite song, your borrowed time, none of it is free. It was built, held, preserved by people who gave more than we'll ever know. And yes, they made mistakes. All empires do. But they also kept the sun rising. They taught us that gratitude can look like song, that devotion can taste like corn and tears, that survival isn't selfishness, it's sacred. So tomorrow, when the light returns, try not to take it for granted. Try not to forget what it cost. Mexico City doesn't sleep easily. Its nights are loud horns, sirens, stray dogs barking into the dark. But underneath all that noise is another sound, quieter, deeper, a pulse. Because beneath the Cathedral Metropolitana, beneath the plazas and bakeries and subway lines, Tenochtitlan still waits. The Spanish built their cathedral on the ruins of the Templo Mayor, stone by stone, cross over pyramid, mass over memory. But the earth remembers, and sometimes it shifts. Foundations crack, the cathedral tilts ever so slightly, like it's trying to bow, like it's listening. In 1978, a utility crew struck stone, then sculpture. Then Coyolxauhqui, dismembered and defiant, her broken body refusing to stay buried. Excavations began. More gods surfaced. More bones. The city tried to make space. It couldn't look away. And now, you can stand in the square and see both worlds at once. The cathedral's shadow falling across the altar of Huitzilopochtli. Tourists buying snow cones on a battlefield. Children running over graves with names they'll never pronounce. And the gods, they wait. They don't rage. They observe. Because the night doesn't forget. It just closes its eyes and listens. You've heard the drums by now. Not in this world, maybe, but in your head, in your ribs. Some part of you knows the beat. And no matter how many centuries pass, songs have a way of returning. In a child's lullaby, in a grandmother's humming, in a melody half remembered during a walk at dusk. The Mexica didn't write music the way we do. They didn't record it. They lived it, in flutes made of bone, in conch shells pressed to lips, in turtle shells struck with sticks, heartbeats echoing off clay. Music wasn't entertainment. It was medicine, instruction, offerings you could hear. You sang not to be heard, but to participate, to stay in sync, to remember your place in the story. And when someone died, the music didn't stop. It changed, took on the rhythm of breath slowing, of memory dissolving, of bones being wrapped for the journey. Even now, the old music rises. At festivals, at protests, in classrooms where Nahuatl is whispered again, syllable by syllable, like water returning to a cracked bowl. It cannot be erased, because the song knows the way back, through silence, through erasure, through centuries of forgetting. It hums beneath the asphalt. It vibrates in the subway rails. It waits in the soft hands of children too young to know what they're carrying. But they carry it. And so do you, even if you don't know the words. Yet, not all monuments speak in plaques. Some whisper in erosion, in the way moss clings to cracks, in the shadows they cast on the longest day of the year. The Mexican knew how to build with purpose. Their temples weren't just altars, they were calendars. Their plazas aligned with the sun. Their stairways bled with intention. Every stone held meaning, and when those stones were toppled, they didn't forget, they absorbed. Like bone absorbs trauma, like earth absorbs heat. You can feel it if you try, not as sound, as pressure. Stand near the ruins of the Templo Mayor at midnight. Let the lights of the city fade, breathe. You'll feel it in your feet, a hum, a weight. It's not threatening, but it is watching, not because it wants revenge, because it remembers. It remembers being built with care. It remembers feet pounding up its steps. It remembers flowers and feathers and screams. And it remembers silence, the kind that fell after fire, the kind that tastes like forgetting. But the stones are patient. They don't beg. They don't boast, they just are. waiting for someone to listen without asking for translation, without needing a museum tag to believe, just someone willing to press their ear against the past and hear the echo of a world that once spoke in rhythm and rain. The Mexica Empire collapsed in 1521 of the Common Era. That's the sentence you'll find in textbooks. Clean, certain, but collapses are never so tidy. Empires don't fall like walls, they erode like cliffs. Bit by bit, storm by storm, until one day the ground gives way and no one can remember what it looked like before. The Spanish one, yes. They toppled temples, melted gold, baptized survivors at sword point. But what they couldn't kill, what they never understood, was the hunger. Not for conquest, for meaning, for connection, for symmetry between the sun and the soul. The Mexica didn't vanish. They adapted, changed clothes, changed names, sang the same prayers under new saints, hid their gods in plain sight. The hunger never left. You can still see it in how they mourn, in how they decorate graves on Dia de los Muertos with marigolds and mirrors and molds, in how they tell stories that circle rather than conclude, in how they still thank the sun for rising. And what about us? We who live in the ruins of so many broken empires, we who measure life in achievements instead of alignments, we who forget to look up, we inherited their hunger, not for hearts. For wholeness, we crave myth, meaning, ceremony. We feel the emptiness and call it anxiety, call it burnout, call it Tuesday. But maybe it's just the echo of the fifth sun fading from our skin. Maybe it's the silence after the chant. Maybe it's the gods, still hungry, still waiting, watching us scroll and sigh and sleep without dreaming. And maybe the answer isn't in rebuilding Tenochtitlan. Maybe it's in rebuilding ourselves, not as conquerors, but as people who remember what it means to give something back to the sky, even if all you have is your breath, even if all you can say is I'm here. You've almost forgotten how to see in the dark. Streetlights buzz overhead, your screen glows. Every shadow has been chased away by artificial certainty. But once long before algorithms, before engines, before the hum of electricity, people knew how to see the sky, really see it. The Mexica built their lives around the stars. They didn't study constellations as distant curiosities. They treated them like family. The Pleiades, which they called Tenochtitlan, the marketplace told them when to plant, when to fight, when to stop and watch. Every 52 years, when the calendars realigned, the people would extinguish every fire in the land. They would wait in absolute darkness. No cooking, no lamps, no warmth, just silence, just breath. And when Tenochtitlan reached its highest point in the sky, when the stars took their proper place, they would light a new fire from the chest of a man chosen for this one purpose. They would cut into him, strike a spark in his ribs, and with that flame, relight the world, not out of cruelty, out of gratitude, because they believed the universe didn't owe them anything. Every year was a gift, every alignment a conversation, every dawn a debt paid. And us, we don't look up anymore, we look down. We bury our heads in timelines and feeds. We call ourselves modern, but we've forgotten how to be still, how to wonder, how to earn the stars. But we could remember. It's not too late. Go outside tonight, turn off your phone, find the sky, find one star, just one. Speak to it, not with words, but with presence, with breath, with awe, and feel, for a moment, what they felt. Not fear, not even faith, just that soft, trembling recognition that you are small and precious, and not alone. The stars haven't forgotten you, and neither have they. Not the gods, not the poets, not the ones who built gardens on lakes and fed the sun with their own hands. They remember, they are waiting, they are whispering your name in the dark. Let's be honest, when you clicked on this, you expected blood. You expected spectacle, shock, maybe a little guilt, maybe a lot. You came to confirm what you already believed, that the Aztecs were brutal, that you're lucky to live in a more civilized time, and that history is best appreciated from a safe distance. And yet, ... here you are, 2 hours later, still listening. Not because of the gore, because of the grief. Because somewhere along the way, the story stopped being about them, and started being about you. What you fear, what you long for, what you've forgotten. You saw yourself not in the priests, or the warriors, or even the gods, but in the uncertainty, the questions, the aching need to belong to something older than your inbox, to make meaning out of pain, to offer something, anything that matters. You came for human sacrifice, you stayed for the human condition, and maybe that's the point, because history isn't a cautionary tale, it's a mirror, a whisper, a lesson written in ash and jade and silence. And when we say you wouldn't last a day in the Aztec Empire, we're not mocking you, we're mourning something. The rituals we've lost, the rhythms we've silenced, the stars we no longer name, and the gods, whether real or imagined, that we stopped feeding, not with hearts, but with wonder. You came here looking for horror. You found a mirror, and it's still reflecting. You live in an empire too. Maybe it doesn't look like one. Maybe it doesn't wear gold or feathers or blood-stained cloaks. Maybe it wears denim or logos or the flicker of your phone screen in the dark at 3 a.m. when you should be sleeping but instead are scrolling, half dreaming, half drowning, looking for something you forgot how to name. But it's an empire just the same, built on extraction, expansion, endless appetite. And like all empires, it tells you it's forever, that it's the pinnacle of something, that nothing came before it worth remembering, except maybe as a costume, a tourist attraction, a unit in your 9th grade history class. It gives you comforts, clean water, clean teeth, streaming services, brunch, and in return, it asks only for your attention, constantly, unquestioningly. But sometimes if you're quiet, you hear the rattle beneath the concrete, a tremor in your routines. You see the ghost of something older moving behind the reflection in your microwave door. You sense that all of this, your schedules, your data plans, your carefully filtered plans for self-optimization, is balancing on a precipice, and that the wind is changing. Because empires fall, they always have. Not just the ones made of stone, the ones made of stories, the ones made of certainties. They fall when they forget to feed what matters, when they stop listening to the sky, when they treat the past as a warning instead of a wound. The Mexica Empire was brilliant, and violent, and terrified, and glorious, and doomed, just like yours. And they knew it. They knew every city is temporary, every sun has its setting, but they also knew how to grieve it properly, to weep with flowers, to let the gods go down with grace, to carve memory into stone before the flood came. Can we say the same? Will anyone remember what we built? Will anyone weep for it? Will they sift through the ashes of our language, our steel, our satellite sand, find poetry, or just receipts? Your empire may not demand your heart, but it takes your time, your breath, your wonder, and maybe if we're not careful, it will take your memory to that. That would be the real sacrifice. Most people try not to think too hard after sunset. The day exhausts us enough. Deadlines, chores, arguments replayed in the shower, emails sent with too much or too little punctuation. We long for stillness. But when night comes, real night, not just absence of sun, but presence of dark, our minds shift. We start asking questions we spend all day avoiding. And maybe that's why you're still here. Not because you care about the Aztecs, but because some part of you is tired of silence. Not the quiet kind, the empty kind. The kind where everything feels too fast and too shallow and too optional. So you turned to history, a place where nothing is optional, where the gods are loud, where the stars make demands, where the air smells of maize and meaning. And you asked, what did they know that we forgot? The Mexica didn't waste their nights. They gathered under sky and fire and ritual. They sang, not because they were happy, but because they were awake. They watched the moon move through cycles, not just to track time, but to feel part of it. They knew grief. They knew famine, drought, plague, betrayal, the cold taste of fear at the back of the throat. But they refused to live small. Even when the world cracked, they danced anyway. They fed the gods anyway. They built floating gardens in lakes that could swallow them whole. They etched poetry into walls that would one day be rubble. And when the night came, they welcomed it. Not because it was kind, because it was honest. Because night doesn't flatter you. It doesn't ask what you've earned. It just asks what you remember. And tonight, whether you meant to or not, you remembered something. Not a fact, not a date, not the number of steps on the Templo Maya. You remembered that the world is older than you, that your breath has a history, that your bones were shaped by ancestors who danced and wept and feared the eclipse, that you are, in some impossible way, a continuation, not of empire, but of yearning, and yearning is sacred. It's what keeps the drum beating, even after the dancers are gone. There's something humbling about the dawn, not just because it's beautiful, but because it's indifferent. It shows up whether or not you're ready, whether or not you've done enough, whether or not you even noticed the night. The Mexica didn't take that for granted. They didn't assume the sun was automatic. They treated every sunrise like a gift that had to be earned, like a lover who might leave if you stopped saying their name. So they said it with breath, with blood, with song and ash and flowers. They reminded the sun again and again that they were here, that they were trying, that they still believed. And you, what does your morning mean? Is it a checklist, a sprint, a burden, or is it a ritual you've forgotten how to perform? Because you do have rituals. You check your phone, you drink your coffee in the same chipped mug, you scroll through strangers' lives, you put on the armor of another day. But what if your ritual could be reverent? What if brushing your teeth was an offering? What if tying your shoes was a hymn? What if the moment you stepped outside and felt the sun on your face, you whispered, I remember, not what, just something, because it's all still here. The sun, the sky, the breath, the circle. And maybe it doesn't need your sacrifice anymore. Maybe all it needs is your attention, your participation, your willingness to say, I'm still part of this, even now. Even in a world that spins too fast and grieves too quietly and forgets too easily. You don't need to bleed for the dawn, but you do need to notice it. That's what the Mexica gave us. Not just temples, not just terror, but a theology of presence. And that presence is still available to anyone who's willing to slow down, to look up, to say thank you to a sky that does not answer back, but rises anyway. We've reached the end, or something like it. There's no temple to climb, no altar to kneel before, just you, sitting quietly in a room that now feels different, heavier, older, more alive. You know more now than when you started, but more than knowledge, you've gathered weight, not a burden, a grounding, because the Mexico world was never meant to be entertainment. It was never meant to be summarized, judged, pitied, or painted on a tourist's t-shirt. It was a world, full, complicated, tender, and terrifying, and it meant something to the people who sang in it, fought in it, loved in it, died for it. And tonight, you gave it your attention. You sat with it. You didn't flinch at the blood. You didn't blink at the stars. You didn't laugh at the poetry. You stayed, and that matters, because we live in an age of instant forgetting, of endless scrolling, of headlines that turn horror into background noise. But not this, not tonight. Tonight, you remembered. A city that rose from a lake and fed its gods with courage. A language that holds gratitude like a gift between teeth. A people who walked in circles, not because they were lost, but because they knew how to return. And maybe so do you. So what now? No call to action, no moral, no link in the description. Just a breath, and maybe a whisper if you feel brave enough. Tlotsakamati, thank you. Not for watching, not for subscribing, for being here. For remembering something most of the world forgot. For honoring the sun, not with sacrifice, but with presence. And when you wake tomorrow, and the light touches your face, let it be not a command, but an invitation to rise, to return, to begin again, like the fifth sun, like the lake, like the breath you just took, soft and sacred. Thank you for staying with me through the long dark of history. Whether you listened to this all at once, or drifted in and out like smoke, your presence matters. It always has. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, you're warmly invited to subscribe, only if it feels right. This is a quiet channel, and there's always a place here for you. And if you're still awake, good night. Wherever you are, however you're feeling, you are not alone. The gods remember, and now so do you. Sleep well, and thank you for watching.